a sustainable future is in all likelihood not going to be a static future. Power and money corrupt substantially. And almost everybody that I have seen that comes into some position of power ends up changing their behavior. And that's putting it in terms of a guiding concept for how humanity can live with humane conditions for all of humanity around the world now and in the future, find a way to live into a good Anthropocene. If we're going to inspire people into a change, then it's very difficult to inspire them by preaching water and drinking wine.
Have you ever heard of the term Anthropocene before?
Do you know what a change agent is? Welcome to a new episode of the Compass to Sustainability. Today we talk to Professor Mark Lawrence about his clear vision for a sustainable future and his idea of a compass that can help us individuals navigate towards this future.
Mark is an expert in the field of sustainability. He advises the German government and he takes part in climate negotiations.
We had the privilege to have Mark as a professor in one of our lectures in our study program. And Mark was really such a great professor. When he was there, he just created such a special atmosphere and everyone wanted to engage with him. And you just felt that he has a very profound understanding of sustainability and everything he said made so much sense. We hope we can carry some of that mood also in our conversation today with him.
Have fun with watching this episode and remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. Send us an email or write us in the comments what your compass or your vision for the sustainable future is. Oh, hello, and welcome to a new episode of our podcast, Compass to Sustainability. Samuel and I are sitting on the top floor of the Research Institute for Sustainability. We're overlooking the city of Potsdam, and today we're joined by the co-director, Professor Mark Lawrence. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us today.
Well, thank you guys for coming out here, and I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, before we dive in, I just wanted to quickly mention how cool this building is. I think it used to be a bank before, and now you've transformed it into a sustainability hub. I think that's really cool, and like the windows and the garden here on the rooftop, I think that's amazing.
Well, thank you. I'll have to say, however, that the transformation is not complete because it still is relatively energy intensive, but those are the kinds of things we're generally talking about with sustainability and trying to understand how we go about that.
Before we start, or initially I have a question prepared for both of you, and Sebastian is also not prepared for it. As you are the co-director of the Research Institute for Sustainability, and you're the co-moderator of the Compass to Sustainability, I was wondering, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear sustainability?
Well, sustainability used to be a term that disturbed me quite a bit because I had such a difficult time with the various definitions of it. But now the first thing that comes to my mind is actually the definition that we spent a year at this institute coming up with, an operational working definition for ourselves. And that's putting it in terms of a guiding concept for how humanity can live with humane conditions for all of humanity around the world now and in the future, and to restore and preserve the natural foundations that we need in order to enable that. And that's what comes to mind with sustainability nowadays.
What is it for you, Sebastian?
Well, for me, I think sustainability has always been closely tied to the environment. So it's interesting because now only I learned that sustainability means much more. Actually, it's also like the social aspects. And for me, it was just basically, being responsible with the environment and the natural resources that we have. That was sustainability for me. Mark, what kind of work do you do here at the Research Institute for Sustainability? Like, are you a sustainability scientist, kind of? Is that what you could be called, or?
Yeah, I think you might call that a sustainability scientist, but I would really emphasize that I'm not a scientist working about or trying to understand sustainability. Rather, we're a research institute for sustainability. So what we're really working on is, number one, supporting selected transformations in society, supporting the knowledge that we need, bringing that knowledge from all sorts of sectors, not just from the sciences, but from all sectors, all sorts of sectors together, and working together with policymakers and other societal leaders to support those specific transformations. And we work, of course, we work with climate change, but we also work with issues like air pollution, governance of the oceans, working with indigenous communities in the Arctic. We work with the transformation in the Lusatia region from a coal region into a post-coal region. We work on issues of digitalization in industry and so on. So we have a number of different issues that we work on. That's the first part, the outward-looking part. And the second part of our mission is an inward-looking part. We work self-reflexively. That means we try to understand how this kind of research can be done more and more effectively in the future. So in addition to, not in replacing, not in place of, but in addition to the typical curiosity-driven or even applied basic research, we're working in a way that we call transformative and transdisciplinary. And the transdisciplinary means that we go beyond disciplinary and we go beyond interdisciplinary to bring in other forms of knowledge into these processes. And what we'd like to understand is, how can we do that? How is that working now? And how can we do that more and more effectively to help have a better place for science in the structure of supporting societal transformations towards sustainability? And my personal work then at RIFS is number one, trying to strategically pave out a pathway for the future of our work so that we take on topics that are important, but we don't spread ourselves too thin at the same time, and choosing what we would focus on, guiding the group leaders and the research group members and working together with our fellows at the Institute on this, and occasionally being very involved in specific topics and specific research projects myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the goal of this podcast that Samuel and I have is to provide individuals or young people with a compass that guides us into the sustainable future. And we want to do so by talking to individuals like you from also transdisciplinary fields. And I mean, the reason why we are here is because humans inherently are influencing the planet in many different ways. And you are an expert in this because Paul Crutzen used to be your supervisor when you were doing your PhD, and he coined this term of the Anthropocene, which maybe you could explain a little bit for the audience.
Well, first off, I think this is a cool mission for this podcast, and I hope that there's going to be some real success from that. I hope that the viewers will really gain insights, but also gain inspiration. It's both structuring and it's the energy and the positive direction and the inspiration that helps together with our insights to bring us forward. And we really need to go forward. Why do we need to go forward? Because we are in the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, put simply, means that the anthropos, humans, are having an impact on the world, on the entire Earth, that is global in scale, and that will still be evident over geological timescales. So the kinds of things that we're changing, you will see in sediments and ice cores over centuries, millennia, and further. And those kinds of changes are from one, the kinds of pollutants that we're putting into the atmosphere, including carbon dioxide, which we often don't think of as a pollutant, but in a sense, carbon dioxide is not a humanly health harmful pollutant, but it's basically polluting our environment with something that is a greenhouse gas in much greater amounts than it was there before, and it's leading to a substantial part of our climate change. But there's other things, like we're putting plastics into the environment. That will be evident in sediments over long time scales. We have developed horrible nuclear weapons, and the testing of those nuclear weapons has left a small trace of radioactive fallout that will actually be evident over geological timescales, and so on and so forth. Even surprising ones like concrete, in all likelihood, is going to be evident. We've even changed the structure of chickens and chicken bones. And with the billions and billions of chickens in the world, there's some consideration that will also be evident. So we've created these are all examples of how we see this geologically. But then we know what the Anthropocene really means for us. We've created a situation where, number one, we're into such a competition for resources, and number two, we're causing such stresses on the environment, climate change and many of the things that go along with that, but also enormous loss of biodiversity, also other pollutants into the environmental system that will in turn have an impact back on humanity. And that impact back on humanity makes an already difficult situation even more difficult. And that's the reason why I and many others are inspired to do what we can to try to find a way to live into a good Anthropocene, live in what we would consider a sustainable sense with each other, or at least a much more sustainable sense with each other, and then support the common good around the world.
Yeah, nice. I think you made pretty clear now that we humans have such a great impact now on the planet that has never been there in this extent before. And that this impact is not only bad for the planet, so to say, but it really returns back to us. We're short on resources, and we really feel the answer, so to say, that the planet has to our actions that we do now. And I think that also makes super clear why you're here at the Institute researching for sustainability towards it, not about this concept. And I think we can really dive deeper into all the things you mentioned on that transdisciplinary and all that stuff later. But maybe the first thing I wanted to ask, and I want to bring a quote for this, is so we want to have a change, so to say, from that. We want to change our behavior from that bad Anthropocene we're in now towards a good Anthropocene. And there's this quote by Mahatma Gandhi: "Be the change in the world that you want to see." And we've heard it quite often in your talks and your presentations, and we found it really inspiring. And I wanted to ask, so we individuals want change, we want to see it, and then this quote answers with, okay, then just be that change. So it really links that individual level that we are with our actions with the global level, maybe the change in the world that we want to see. Does that work? Are these levels so linked?
So I'm going to take a step back on that and say, when we think about the linking between the individual and the global, we also need to think about the linking between the Anthropos and the Anthropocene. Mm-hmm. And the Anthropos is made up of individuals. And this number of individuals has increased from 10,000 at the time of the bottleneck in human existence, many thousands of years ago, to now being approaching 9 billion, and in my viewpoint, likely exceeding 10 billion in the next decade or so. I don't see this signs of this leveling off like a lot of people suggest that it will level off at under 10 billion. And so we have expanded immensely over this time. And those individuals collectively together lead to what we're calling the Anthropocene. And I would like to make a little point in that the Anthropocene, the term, is not yet accepted by the geological community. Yeah. You guys are quite familiar with this from your studies and from around this. And there's been a lot of debate about that. And part of the reason that the term is not accepted is because there are some in the leading geological community who think the Anthropocene, the proposal for the starting date of the Anthropocene is the 1950s, and with all sorts of evidence of shifts in our effect on the environment that lead us to some time after 1950 being really qualitatively different than all of the time before that, immeasurably qualitatively different, that we have really this massive impact on the environment that you can hardly find anywhere on Earth, that we don't have an impact on the environment, whereas if you go back a couple hundred years, there were all sorts of places that you would still call quite pristine. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about is how do we deal with this issue that indeed the effect of humans on the environment goes way, 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 way back, at least substantially to agriculture, and actually well before that to our mastery of fire and to our ability to work abstractly, our understanding of numbers and our working with language. All these things, bit by bit, have led to have this impact on the environment. And at the same time, we as Anthropos have been expanding from relatively small group of humans to covering almost the entire planet again. So we've proposed a term that we call the Anthropocene expansion, and this would be as an indication of the long period leading up to the Anthropocene. But the Anthropocene is really an epoch that we see that would start in the 1950s and differ the current era from previous eras. So, and this Anthropocene expansion also gives the sense, if with the connection between individuals and systemic and societal changes, that if we were still just a few 10,000s of people, it wouldn't matter much how the individuals live. And it's this interlinkage between the individuals, the expanding number of the individuals. How each individual behaves is still significant in the collective, but the capacity of the individual to steer their behavior in a way that is more or less impactful on the environment is limited by the number of people that there are. And limited by in particular, limited by the systems that we live in, limited by the governance, limited by the technological availability, and so on. So there's actually a lot of thinking behind it before we get to this more practical question of, well, is it the individual that we need to change, or is it the systems that we need to change? And of course, it's both. It's kind of silly that we end up with this discussion over and over again, that some people say, oh no, you can't say that you have to change individual behavior because then you're putting all the responsibility on the consumers, and we can't do that. And that's not going to change anything anyway because it's the big systems that are the problem. And yes, it is the big systems that are the problem. It's the fossil fuel industry and many others that are our real issue. But if the individuals weren't behaving the way that they were, if they weren't desiring the things that they are, we wouldn't have these large industries. So it's really a chicken and egg issue. It's not that we blame one or the other. And the real issue, however, is bringing those into alignment, is bringing the interests on the individual scale in different societies and different cultures and into alignment with the kinds of structures, both governance structures and economic structures and technological structures and physical structures, our infrastructures that we have on the system side, to in turn support the desires of individuals. And our interest is to do so in a way that supports this concept of sustainability, that brings it in a way that is humane for all of the individuals that are involved now and in the future in these structures.
Yeah, it's a complicated interrelationship, so to say, right? So we need the right structures for our individual life and behavior, but we also need the right individual behavior for the structures, so to say, being sustainable. And coming back to the quote, that would be the outline, so to say, for our following conversation. We want to first talk about what is the change in the world that you want to see, and then in the last part about the compass, so how can we be that change, so to say.
So now we bring the quote back into that. Be the change that you want to see. And when we really think about that, that has been very effective in some transformations in society. The quote came from Mahatma Gandhi with their fight in India for the rights of the individuals and for the respect amongst the individuals. And by showing that same kind of respect in terms of nonviolent conflict, it was being that kind of change that they wanted to see towards nonviolence, he helped to also induce that kind of change. When we get to the really, really complex societal issues that we have, which connects to this Anthropocene expansion and connects to the fact that we're in the Anthropocene and all these things that we've been talking about, any individual being the change that you want to see doesn't help much. Any 1,000, million, even 100 million individuals being that change that you want to see, depending on how they're spread out across the globe, might or might not help all that much. So, and that puzzled me because I'm touched by that quote. I really love it, and as you say, you hear me using it on occasions. And so after a while of puzzling over it and really thinking about it, I thought, in our modern context now, 100 years later, maybe we need to change the quote slightly. And instead of be the change that you want to see in the future, be the agents of the change that you want to see in the future. And an agent means somebody who helps something to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, and so sort of like a secret agent, who's or a special agent who's making sure that behind the scenes and undercover the things go on that you want to have happen. And so being this agent, being special agent of the change, I've never actually used the term special agent for it, so it's fun that it's come up with you guys. But be the agent of the change that you want. And that means basically, number one, you actually be the change in the same way as Gandhi had put it across, that if you're going to be the agent of the change, you need to do a few things. Number one, you need to inspire people to follow along with that change. But number two, you need to inform people about what it is with this change because it's so complex. And number three, you need to understand what it is actually that we want to change. And it sort of goes, in the end, we have to turn that around. So the inspiration might come from our systems, but in the end, it's our understanding that leads us to the information that leads to then realizing that we have to carry out this inspiration. And if we're going to inspire people into a change, then it's very difficult to inspire them by preaching water and drinking wine or whatever it is that you do. Yeah, it's very different to inspire them into a change unless they see that you're already at the forefront of leading and living that change. So that's part of the be the change. But the agents of the change means that we spend our time studying it, informing about it, and then doing what else we can do with it. For instance, investing in more sustainable companies, investing in more sustainable mobility, investing in more sustainable homes, investing in more sustainable clothes. Wherever we can find, we let our money speak for us. Perhaps choosing our work to be oriented towards what our beliefs are as important to support sustainability as another form of being the agent of the change. And certainly letting it be a part of our culture and our conversations. In whichever way that we are in conversation with people, and especially most people have some type of cultural interests, and then allowing that to come into your culture, whether it be musical interest or artist interests or theater interests or whatever, allowing that to come in. This is another component that you can have of being this agent of change. So whatever it is that you're doing, think, how can I go about being an agent of change for the future that I want to see?
But if the agents, let's say, are not aligned with the big players or like the big companies' businesses, will they hit a wall and then just crumble? Or do you, because like I heard this rule that there's like 90% of people only, 10% need to instigate the change and then the others 90% will follow. But if, as you said, like the alignment isn't there, will that still work like on a global scale, or how do you imagine that? I don't know. So
that rule is one of these. I'm not sure if you call it an urban myth. Urban myths are these kinds of things that spread as a meme that we have.
Urban legend.
Urban legend, maybe exactly. So and a lot of times it's called. I mean, in this case, urban fits, because a lot of these kinds of changes that have been observed in the past that follow sort of what we call an S curve. So basically, if you imagine as you're going along in time, then you have a long time of some type of feature, and then it starts to increase, and then suddenly flip. Goes way up and then comes out. And so it looks a little bit like an S if you look at that in the time axis. And a wonderful example of that is the transition from horse carriages to automobiles. And if you look at a picture in 1905 out of a street in New York, you might find a car or two there between the horse carriages. And the horses sort of shying away, and you can sort of spot out usually where the cars were. And if you look at a picture in 1915, 1920, you might find a horse carriage or two in there trying to weave their way and still safely between the cars. And so, I mean, we've had societal transformations that have happened very quickly. We've had lots of other ones. The transformation from almost all public spaces being smoking spaces and small areas being non-smoking to almost all public spaces in Germany being non-smoking and only small areas for smoking. That also happened in a few years period, and it was a brave few who said our restaurants and so on are not going to fail due to this, and we are going to be able to succeed. In fact, we might even succeed better. That allowed that transition to happen. But the 10% rule is, it's more of an observation that once something gets going far enough, then the transition can go along, but it's not a specific rule. I've heard people say 10%, I've heard people say 20%, I've heard people say you don't know because it's also context specific. We have a number of cases where we have been able to societally induce changes that are for the good, for the better, or for the worse. I'm not sure going from horses to cars was in many ways certainly better, but we went to gasoline and diesel-driven cars instead of going to electric cars. The transition to non-smoking zones is certainly for the better for health. Some people would say it's for the worse for their freedom. So everybody judges this differently. But you're absolutely right that with these kinds of transitions, we do run up against major blockages. And the issue is that that's also part of being an agent of change. One of the forms of the agents that we need for transformations are people who can speak effectively and be heard by those who have substantial power. And those are also agents that we need. People who are in a position where they really care about the common good. They really care about transformation to sustainability, and they can find the part of those people who have extreme wealth or extreme power that also cares about the common good, that also cares about sustainability, and that they can latch onto that well, communicate with them, inspire them to also be a part of these transformations. And in a way that perhaps, since sustainability is about long-term success in the end, in a way that perhaps actually leads them to a long-term success, even if it might be challenging for them on the short term. And that longer-term success might lead others in the same industrial sectors or in the same political realm to look at that and say, well, this is actually something that may be a quote-unquote business model for the longer-term future. It's a real challenge, though, because power and money corrupt substantially. And almost everybody that I have seen that comes into some position of power ends up changing their behavior through that position of power. And that goes from relatively small, leading an institute level, or leading a larger center, or leading an organization, up to the highest levels that you see people that come into these power, and then people that come into substantial amounts of money will often be changed by it. Power more so than the money, but the money, of course, enables the power that often leads to this kind of transformation, and especially of the natural human desire to want to keep that, and perhaps to want to accumulate more of it. And, of course, that's a factor that works, again, against our ability to have change agents actually helping to induce a change towards what we want in the direction of sustainability.
I think that's already an awesome idea for our compass, that we are informed, firstly, understand it, and then inspire people as change agents by looking for opportunities or for connections that we have that maybe just have more impact than we as individuals have, right? So what can we do with our money? Maybe what persons do we know that have more impact than we do from our social environment, so to say, and how can we really influence them to broaden our impact, so to say? Coming back maybe to the idea of the change that we want to see, or the vision, could you bring that in words when you wake up in the morning, so to say, and dreamed of your future that is sustainable? What would that look like? What would that vision for future be?
So a sustainable future can take on all sorts of different forms. and you could call it sustainable. And that's part of why we decided to take the definition of sustainability as a guiding concept. Rather than as a specific goal, that this is an existing state, rather it's a guiding concept to guide us into the future, especially because a sustainable future is in all likelihood not going to be a static future. It's probably also not going to be one that is characterized by permanent and unlimited growth. The way that we have developed our mindset around much of our society now. But it's not going to be one where humanity reaches some state and that's it. In all likelihood, in fact, our transitions in society the rate of change has grown so rapid. It's probably hard for us to imagine how rapidly things may be changing in the future. And so it's not that we reach a sustainable state, but it's that we reach a sustainable transformation and a way in which that the transformations that are occurring in society orient us. For me, sustainability is an orientation, and it would orient us towards this guiding concept of humane living. That's the fundamental component, that if there are people in the world who are suffering unnecessarily, of course, there's suffering that comes about due to physical injuries, due to diseases. There's suffering that comes about due to the loss of loved ones. But there's a lot of suffering that comes about unnecessarily. There's suffering that comes about due to humans taking advantage of or making use of, or even to the point of enslaving other humans, or violently overpowering other humans, or violently even torturing or killing other humans. And to me, a world that I would characterize as a world that is oriented towards sustainability is one in which that stepwise disappears. Where we get to where if we recognize that there is suffering going on, the whole collective cares about that suffering and wants to support it. And those who are familiar with Buddhist philosophy might say, oh, that's interesting. The Buddha defined enlightenment as the absence of suffering. Is enlightenment like sustainability? Well, I don't know. I haven't thought about that much. This is a fun thing about podcasts, is you always enter into territory that you haven't been thinking about much. But really, when it comes down to it, this humane living conditions for all people worldwide, and I would add to that then for all sentient beings, all non-human animals worldwide, because we have put billions and billions and billions of non-human sentient beings to extreme degrees of suffering as well. And to me, however, it's not humane to me, myself, to be treating something else in a way that's causing it substantial suffering. So it's a fundamental component of humanity and humaneness. So that's the fundament. How that actually looks, whether we are Homo technicus, whether we are Homo intellicus, or whether we actually leave the physical body, the organic body in the way that we know it, and end up completely in a silicon-supported world, whether we stay on Earth, whether the Anthropocene expansion continues out into other galaxies or so on, all of those are perfectly possible. Whether we scale back and recognize the beauty of organic body and allow artificial intelligence to become machine sentience and to evolve itself, and we're sort of quasi-enlightened, peacefully interacting beings as humans, or whether we are come into a state where we find that a very routine, structured, disciplined way of life supports then this kind of a long-term sustainable development. And what we do then with the future of potential machine sentience, those are all open issues. And that's why I say there's such a broad picture of how sustainability could be. That we thought getting closer to the future, we'd be able to predict the future better. Getting closer to the future, we recognize it just fans out even more into where the future goes. The future that, of course, I don't hope for is one that is characterized by military violence and dominance, by some fraction of humanity, and there I worried and talked about for 2 decades, more than that, since about the time that Paul Crutzen was talking about the Anthropocene, about Homo technicus, and the possibility that we'd have some fraction of society that would actually dominate and enslave other parts of society in the same way as we basically dominate and enslave non-human animals. And those are the kinds of directions that I see as a potential where we would be going. And that's horrifying. And that's why I put my efforts into doing whatever is possible to direct us into the direction of what I would call orienting on sustainability. And that goes from individual behavior and principles for individual behavior all the way through to trying to work together with societal leaders in policy and industry and religions and indigenous communities and other to help lead us towards more sustainable structures in our societies.
Yeah, I mean, you're part of the Sustainable Council or Council for Sustainable Development, I think that is, and you're also advising the German government on policies. And do you suggest then that young people should adopt these positions where they can like be the agents and influence the decisions that are being made, or what would you say, what can people do to reach that sustainable future that you strive for, that you see?
Well, first off, people, young or old, should adopt what's in their hearts. So I may try to inspire people, I may try to influence people to take on the kind of definition and understanding and love for the concept of and hope for a future that is oriented on sustainability. But I wouldn't tell somebody that they should do that if they don't believe in that and they don't care about it. I mean, that's like, it's like trying to convert somebody's religion. And so on the one hand, yes, I do want to influence people normatively as a human who cares deeply about sustainability issues. On the other hand, I see my rights to do that as very limited. And so it's not my rights to enforce people. And so I wouldn't tell somebody they should do this. I would tell somebody, if they care about the kinds of things that I care about, and if they look into themselves deeply and they want to then align their lives with being able to support those things that they care about, then here are some recipes for doing so. And I'd been puzzling over this for a long time, and almost 3 years ago now, at the beginning of 23, I published a blog article putting together my reflections on this. And anybody who's really interested in this, I can certainly recommend having a read of that. It's a long blog, but it's not a long article. It only takes a.
I think we've read it, right?
Yeah, and we will also link it in the show notes that you can read it.
Oh, excellent! Yeah. So I would say that it's not really a very long read because it basically gives out notes for structuring. It doesn't go into all the details of it, but it gives some ideas behind structuring. And I'd been asked this question: how can I live sustainably? Over and over and over again. And I love the question, but I hate the answer. Because if I'm really answering it seriously, I look at somebody and I say, well, I'm sorry, but you can't. If you're going to stay in this society, you can't. If you could live in something that you consider sustainability if you decide to go off and live off the land, live in the woods. And there's a lot of stories of people who have been interested in doing that, going back to Henry Thoreau as one of the famous ones from our society, but throughout societies. But in our society, as soon as you pay taxes, some of those taxes are being used for subsidies for kerosene and other fossil fuels. You can't get away from it. You know, you can go to the store and you can try to buy everything of yours and be consumer, but nevertheless you're going to pay taxes, and the taxes will go into this. So you can't get away from it. You can't live sustainably in an absolute sense. But what you can do is live in support of sustainability. And that's where this guiding concept comes in so nicely, and living in support of sustainability. And for me, I came up with 7 principles that I've been thinking about for structuring this. And those principles, I'm working still into developing that into actual individual practices. But there's sort of the objective of the objective is living in support of sustainability. If you care about that objective, then principles that you can follow are things like being very mindful of the physical resources, the material resources that you make use of or that you cause use of through your consumer actions. Being very mindful of human resources, understanding how you're applying yours and how you are forcing other people or encouraging other people or enticing other people into applying their human resources. Striving to take very good care of your body, mind, spirit system. Taking care of all of these together as a component of, well, if you want to be in sustainability, you want something that's going to last. And so it's the body, mind, spirit system. That is the part of what it is. Striving for excellence wherever you can, but not for competition in the sense of a seesaw competition where you bring yourself up and put others down. Rather than if you're going to compete, use it for the sake of being able to bring everyone up through that spirit of play that comes through competition. That's wonderful. And then there are 3 more in there, which are worth going through briefly. Doing the very best that you can to do as little harm as you can. So striving to do no harm knowably to other humans and absolutely minimal harm to other beings, other species on this planet. Of course, you're going to have to do some harm in that you eat. Even eating vegetarian, there will be little bugs sitting on what you're eating and so on. I mean, you can't completely avoid it. Harming other humans, you also can't completely avoid it. If you're, like I said, paying taxes, some of those taxes go into things that end up actually harming others. But you can go very far towards reducing the amount of harm that you do towards others. And then the last 2 are striving to actually exist in the state that you imagine the future being. If you're thinking of a sustainable future, like I said, there's different ways that it could be. For me, it would be one where there is an enormous amount of harmony in the interactions, this great support and this great intolerance for suffering that doesn't have to be there. And so actually trying to live in a sense of unconditional loving kindness. Of course, we don't achieve that, but we hardly ever use those kinds of terms in the scientific community, but unconditional living kindness, trying to strive towards that. And then the last one is perhaps the most important one of all of them. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to achieve any of these completely, and I fail at these all the time. And the one about doing harm to others, I think I do fairly well at succeeding in having changed a lot of things. I don't tease people the way that I used to if it would bother them. I tease when I notice that everybody's going to have fun with it. But I've actually watched this and changed a lot of these things. But I mean, material and human resources and so on, and striving for not competing with people, and that's a nature and so on. Boy, these are hard. But just because I don't achieve it 100% doesn't mean I should just throw in the towel and say, forget it, it's not possible. Rather, not letting the perfect, not letting the ideal work against the good, the steps and the striving for it, rather continuing on for that. And that to me is very important for people to keep in mind, because it's very easy to get burned out real quickly if you let this ideal get carried away and you become frustrated that you haven't been able to achieve it. And so if there's readers out there that are interested, they can read into that more, and perhaps they would find ways to adopt that into their own lives and maybe change a few here or there, but find a structure and a system that fits for you.
I think that's also a great inspiration for the audience to think about their vision for a sustainable future, right? Because we have to have this orientation, so to say, and have to have a dream that we want to reach one day, and then align our practices with that, so to say, and keep the points that you just mentioned mindfully in mind. You mentioned don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because that could lead to frustration in the end, right? You could always think, okay, I'm not exactly there, the world is not exactly there where I want it to be. So what is maybe your motivation, or what gives you hope that we can reach some sustainable future in the end?
what gives me hope is that we can reach some sustainable future. We as humanity are capable of a glorious living together. And you see it in small pockets of society. You see it in individual relationships. You feel it when you walk into a space and there is just a vast support of everybody in the space, and you become a part of that. You feel what an immense capacity we have as humanity, really, to live in support of a society that if that were to scaled up to a global scale, would be very close to what I would call sustainability. And then it would depend on how it transitions in the future as to whether or not it stays in that kind of state of sustainability. At the same time, we have an incredible intelligence. We have the intelligence that has allowed us to understand so much in the environment. We might not be able to understand everything in the environment and understand everything that goes around us in physics and so on. Individuals might not. Maybe even our brain, which was developed to help us keep us alive on the savannah, maybe there's things that even that can't understand. We'll see in the future. Maybe the support of artificial intelligence, machine sentience, the combination of that through some kind of Homo technicus in the future would allow us a greater degree of understanding. But we're already at a state where we've been able to develop tools and technologies and resources, an understanding of use of resources, an understanding of limitations of resources, an understanding of the impacts of the pollution from the use of those resources, the waste from the use of those resources. We understand all of that well enough that we actually could live in a state with 10 billion people on the earth that would basically resemble the kind of state that I envision as a state of sustainability. Or not a state of sustainability, a sustainability-oriented future development. So it gives me hope that we can do this. And of course, it gives me worry that we're not doing this already. But it gives me hope that there are so many people who are interested in this. And I hope some of the listeners to this podcast will be inspired by this and all of the other podcasts. I've listened to one of the others and found that these can be quite inspiring, and that they'll be inspired by this to also do their part, whatever it is that they can do well, but do their part to help us to live in a world that is oriented on the principles of sustainability.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think you really inspired us. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sebastian and Samuel. It was great talking with the two of you, and all the best to all of your listeners and to you both also in your work.
Thank you.